Thanks for inviting us to this thing, and it's really interesting to hear that you have this kind of a. Okay, can you turn down it a bit because yeah. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so it's interesting to hear that you have this kind of a club that you organize things, and that reminds me of my kind of early college days when in the 90s we had this, we called it Ihmettelijöiden klubi, so we had a bunch of people and we gathered together and sometimes asked some persons to talk about something. So I think it's a really kind of interesting format, and I try to keep my kind of presentation very short that we can have a lot of discussion, because I think that's like the most important thing in kind of things like this. So at Reaktor I'm doing artificial intelligence systems. I'm designing and implementing, participating in teams and helping customers in thinking about what they could use AI for and what would be beneficial for their business. But today I thought that I would talk about some ethical problems that I think that we face when we are taking artificial intelligence systems in use, and how that changes our society and so forth. And I used a kind of a provocative title that is not what you think. It might be exactly what you think, but in the end I'm going to say something about what something that it is and what I think it isn't. So I'm going to have like 3 short case studies for this problem, and then in the end talk about why I think that superintelligence is not part of the relevant problems now. So the first one is this. So we talk about autonomous vehicles, and there's this, I don't know who of you have seen something like this. So who will driverless cars decide to kill? So we have a case where this car here is driving, and it's inevitable that it will hit this kind of bunch of people, or this one that is coming here. So we'll make an active decision to kind of turn away and kill this one. So active decision to kill a human being. So should an autonomous vehicle do that? Or should it do this? So if there's one person here, and there's some, you can think that this is like a bridge, for example, that if the car drives off the bridge, it's certain that everybody in the car will die. So should the autonomous vehicle drive off the road, or should it kill this one? So which one to kill? And still a third one, okay, if there's a bunch of people, let's say that there's one person and the car manufacturer thinks that, okay, the person that owns the car is more important than some kind of passerby, then what if there's a kind of group of people? So to kill 10 or to kill 1, how should you do this? So this is what we have been discussing about lately, and this is actually a parallel to this trolley problem. How many of you have seen this? Okay, some have seen. So this is a kind of trolley problem that is used in moral philosophy as a kind of thinking experiment. That we ask that if there's this trolley that is on the track and nobody can stop the trolley, but you are here, you have this what's this called? Is it lever? Gear? Yeah. So you have this lever that you can use to make this trolley go here or make it go here. What would you do? Would you kind of actively kill this person, or do nothing and 5 person dies? And so this is similar to what we had there in the autonomous vehicle problem. And I say that, so this is a kind of a thinking experiment moral philosophers use to examine our values. For example, one thing is that you ask whether a human being is willing to actively sacrifice somebody. Because if I pull the lever here, then I have killed this person. But I can kind of think that, okay, I didn't see this happening at all, 5% dies, but I'm not responsible for that one. So that is one thing. So what's the kind of how do we see ourselves as responsible of some things that we do or that we don't do, or something that we let happen or something like that. But I say that this is not a tool to ask who an autonomous trolley should kill. So moral philosophers don't think about who the trolley should kill in a situation like this. So I say as well that in case of autonomous vehicles, this is wrong. So moral philosophers don't want to ask who the autonomous vehicle should kill, but they want us to put in a situation where we can think about moral things, moral aspects of how we design these autonomous vehicles. So, for example, how slow should they drive in cities so that it's safe for pedestrians? Of course, if the speed is 0, no pedestrian will die. If the speed is very high, then it's likely that sometimes some pedestrians will die. So what about 10 kilometers an hour? Is it okay that sometimes somebody dies? Can we design the things in such a way that somebody sometimes dies, so that we can save some time for the passengers in the autonomous vehicle? As well, we can ask if the level of safety is actually a sufficient metric. So if the autonomous vehicle is safer than human drivers, is it enough? Or what if the autonomous vehicle randomly, accidentally kills some persons? Is it okay that we have such a kind of a traffic system where we have pedestrians and then we have these machines, and every now and then somebody just dies and nobody can do anything about that? Is that okay? In case of humans, we can always look if somebody was responsible for the mistake. If there's a driver, did he actually drive in such a speed that if possible he can stop before hitting the pedestrian, or was it so that there was nothing he could do? Can we ask these questions in cases of autonomous vehicles, and in which stage should we ask? Can we hold the software manufacturer responsible for some software bugs, for example? So I think these are the questions that we should ask about. And then there's one extra one, is that currently autonomous vehicles are not very good in kind of coping with the complexity of traffic as a whole. So it's possible that when we get the first generations of autonomous vehicles, we might want to somehow formalize the traffic system so that we know that it always operates in a certain way. Of course, to do that, we may want to exclude humans from the equation. So it's possible that we don't allow, for example, human drivers, but it's possible that we don't allow human pedestrians at all, even. So my question is this, that this is actually from Amsterdam, a really nice city, that I think in the 60s it looked like this, and what we have managed to do is make it a really, really nice kind of environment for us humans to have coffee, and for the kind of drivers and cars to coexist in the same space. So if we want to make the traffic formalized, it means that we are going back towards this one. So what kind of cities do we build if we want to have this like formalized traffic where traffic doesn't coexist with humans? So I think this is one of the ethical questions. Another case, some of you may have seen this one. So this is about using a predictive model in the court so when algorithms rule on jail time. In the US, there have been reports that in several states they use predictive algorithms like this, that the algorithm takes all the case data that you have, and then the algorithm tries to predict, for example, whether the subject shows up in court. So whether when you are thinking about putting the bail, you can kind of adjust the sum so that if it's likely that he or she doesn't, then put a high bail or maybe no bail at all. And as well, they can ask whether the subject would commit another crime. So this, at least in one state, they use this system that when somebody has committed a crime and is doing time, then when they consider whether they could be released on parole, they can use this algorithm to kind of predict whether he would commit another crime if he got parole. So you get a kind of a probability that, okay, with 35% probability this person will commit another crime, and with 15% that person would commit another crime. So you can use this this kind of assessment in making the decision whether you actually let this person go or not. But when you give all the kind of case information, it's possible that you have some hidden biases, for example, for gender or ethnicity or other things that actually by the rule of law, you wouldn't want to base your decisions on. So you wouldn't want to base the decision on how long a sentence somebody gets. You wouldn't want to base that on what's the color of the person, for example. I think that's illegal in most countries, actually. So there are constitutional rights that is not used. But it's possible that this algorithm deduces it, for example, from the address of the person. So if that person lives in an area where almost all people are black, so it's kind of a hinted that, okay, high probability because you're black. Is that okay? And it's somehow it's even kind of a more complex problem, because these models are often so complex that it's not easy to state exactly the principles that they use to come up with this prediction. So we don't have like simple rules that, okay, if this or that happens to be in part of the data, then that or that decision. So they are not simple like that, but they are complex. So we really can't understand them like perfectly. On the other hand, what we can do is that we can like systematically probe the behavior. So we can say that, of course, what if the data was like this? How would you say the probability is? Or if it's like that, what would happen then? Or this, or this, or this. And actually, in that sense, it's somehow better than what we have with judges, because they also may have biases for gender, ethnicity, how the person was kind of, what did they wear, or what they say in court. That is somehow irrelevant to the case, but somehow they still have they get a kind of global understanding of what kind of a person that person is, or if they need a break, then that may affect their ruling as well. So actually, in some ways, we are like similar to these complex predictive systems, but we are actually harder to be like probed systematically, because there's nothing that guarantees that if we are given a case and we say that we would rule this in this way, there's nothing that guarantees that if we actually are given the case on some other day, we actually do rule it in that way. Of course, we can look at past decisions and ask questions as well. But please.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if it's like cool to interrupt, but it was just this case that there's still one angle that is also like, how do you use that? Like, how do you use that data? Because it could also be a data that could give you some idea, like why people are not showing up at the court, for example. It might be that they can't have like nobody is minding their children, they don't have transport, whatever. So actually this data or this algorithm could be used for totally different purpose than just making the kind of like, yes, you can go or no, you can't go decision. It could also be used to understand better why they are not showing up. Yeah, that's a very good point. So I think if you generalize from that, it's that we can use these predictive models to do some good things for us. If we think about what are the actual effects of how we use it. If we don't do that, if it's just like replace human judges, for example, then most probably we will kind of go in a kind of wrong direction. Then a third case that I took here, it's this one. So there's been some talk about robots or artificial intelligences or machines or whatnot taking our jobs, and Larry Elliott here says that we'd better plan now before it's too late. And I say that there are like societal implications, but again, they are not as we kind of immediately would think they are. And actually, I took a kind of an old graph here, and here's I don't know if you can see in the back. So here we have kind of share of the labor force working in agriculture from the 14th century to this day. So in the kind of 14th century, something like 60 to 75% of England, Netherlands, Italy, France, Poland were working in agriculture, but now almost nobody is working in agriculture. And the question is, how many unemployed do we have in these countries nowadays? It's nowhere near 50 to 75%. Even if we can kind of produce all the food and for all the people with this little workforce. So there's no unemployment in that. Please.
So I challenge this slightly because of the problem of urban migration. So there's no unemployment globally in whatever area it's being taken care of, but the jobs have disappeared from certain areas, which causes massive migration to different things. So statistics are a bit misleading if you take them on that big of an aggregate of a country, because jobs do disappear, and they disappear in localized areas which have specialized heavily and have invested stuff. Yeah,
that's a very good point. I'm actually coming to that point later in this slide. So I say that kind of globally, automation in agriculture has not led to kind of massive unemployment, and I claim that the current trends in AI are no different in that sense, and it's kind of a part of this trend of globalization and digitalization. So artificial intelligence, as we have it today, is not a separate thing from these trends, but it's part of this trend, and it's actually what changes the job market. It does change it. For example, we have a lot of technologies that are nowadays produced by global companies like Google, Facebook, that we used quite different technologies for in like 30 years back. For example, we had a lot of librarians and people that searched information from books and stuff. And now we have Google search. Anybody can do almost the same thing as what we used to use years to kind of train to. So things are easier, but of course it changes the job market in a way that if you think about a Google engineer or somebody that worked in a library, they are not the kind of same skills that you need. So there's massive change going on. But I think that it's similar to what we had, for example, in agriculture. And I do think that we have some kind of like transitional problems, and those can be severe problems as well, even if they wouldn't cause kind of massive like long time unemployment. And I think that for that one we would need to increase like the resilience of the society in some way, so that we are better in kind of adapting to the change. And I think the Nordic countries, they have a good kind of position to actually do that. Okay, and then I promised to say something about this, so this is the last thing. So Elon Musk said that, and there's some other kind of highly esteemed figures, Stephen Hawking, Nick Bostrom, saying that superintelligence is the gravest threat to humankind, or something like that. I don't know, he may be right. I don't know, I doubt it, but we are not there. So I think that thinking that superintelligence is currently an existential threat to us, that we should use a lot of resources to kind of mitigate, that is a threat, because that puts a lot of resources in the wrong place. So I say that we are not on the verge of inventing a conscious, artificially super intelligent being, and it's not possible that something like that would happen in a vacuum, so that we all wouldn't know that it's happening. Currently, it's not happening. I've been working with some people that are kind of on the forefront of the frontier of making artificial general intelligence in the world. And they are not, there are a lot of things that we need to kind of invent before we are there. And the path is not clear. And it's not possible to do that in a kind of closed environment. So because you need kind of a lot of researchers moving in the same direction. And it's not possible to do that kind of in the kind of closed doors. And it's not possible for something like that to just evolve like evolutionary, in an evolutionary way. Because currently we don't have any artificial intelligence systems that would do anything useful that would have learned the skills from the scratch. We have something, though. We have lately we have success in games. So if we have a kind of formal structure, for example, chess or Go, then we can do this from scratch. But there's a very, very big gap between playing a game and succeeding, for example, washing dishes. So washing dishes is a very, very complex problem that no robot today can do without breaking the glasses. Because the real world is such a complex thing. And it's really, really difficult to kind of actually be a kind of continuously successful in living in the world. So that's why I say that we shouldn't worry about that now, because if we worry about that, then all the things that I presented today earlier on, they will get neglected. So we don't solve those because we think that, okay, there's this superintelligence that will wipe us from the face of the earth. So why worry about those? So to conclude, so this was the superintelligence. Then this is partly related to the autonomous vehicle thing. I think this is something that we have not solved, and this is going to be a new thing. So with autonomous vehicles, we are going to have these kind of lethal force machines, hopefully coexisting in the same space as humans. And that is something that we have not had, actually. So usually if we have robots like industrial robots, they are kind of very restricted and we confine them in cases. And if they are operational, no human being can go inside, and we have kind of like massive safety systems to ensure that if a human being would go inside, then it would stop immediately. Of course, we have like lifts and traffic lights and things like that, but okay, lifts, I don't know if they would fall, they would kill humans, but it's easy to make the cables so strong that they don't just magically kind of drop to the ground. And even for traffic lights, if there's some malfunction, humans are driving the cars, they can see that, okay, there's a malfunction, let's slow down. But with autonomous vehicles, we would have like lethal force machines coexisting in the same space. So that is, I think that's kind of a new thing that we need to think about. Another point that I made was that I think that current AI and as well the years to come, it's kind of an extension of digitalization. It's not a thing on its own, but it's part of this kind of digitalization, globalization trend. And I think as well that the ethical problems are largely common as well, and how it changes our society, they are kind of common. Of course, they feed each other as well. And then there's this kind of a implicit bias thing that I think one needs to think about, what kind of decisions we want machines to make and what are the kind of grounds that they can make them for us. Thank you. And questions, I believe there are some.
Hi, yeah, really good presentation. I'd like to expand on one point and add a new point that kind of like as a question. So the expansion is, so it's not always just the predictive model that has the bias. So quite often, especially with courts, the data we train the models with is very biased. So as an example, in the American justice system, like quite many black convictions were done on some rules that came out in a couple of decades ago that basically made it much more expedient and rewarding to the police force to punish black criminals and white criminals, which led to a whole lot of black people being labeled as criminals when they shouldn't have been. So the data itself can be flawed, so it's not always just a model.
And if there's biases in how the data was generated, all the biases will...
So data is not collected, and especially in, well, for example, in Finland, you have a very strong social data collection system, but it's very informal and done without regulation in many countries, such as my own, India. So that's a quite big problem to overcome. So quite often these solutions are produced in a context or a country where there's much stronger data collection, and then the problems are not thought through when they're implemented, such as something that's happening right now in my own country. We're implementing a national security and social security system similar to Finland's, but it's very, very like mixed results on rollout. And the new point, which is something, is the kind of closed box problem. So there's a huge open source movement in AI, but the products that are being used are quite often closed source. So with the judge, I'll use the example of a judge that you used. With the judge, you can do your own research as a person. You can look into his stuff. You can look into how he's made decisions. You can hire your own lawyers to look into him. With a closed box solution, that's not possible. You won't have access to a company's proprietary legal tech AI system. So if public systems start using AI in those kind of roles as judges, should that go hand in hand with an open source movement where you are allowed to inspect the code and challenge stuff, and when you're sitting in jail for a crime you didn't commit, learn to inspect stuff and all of that stuff.
Yes, that's a very good point. And that actually you as well would need to open the data that was used to kind of build the model. Yeah. So yeah, that's a good point, and that's as well. That has applications in other parts of besides AI as well. For example, there has been discussion about having online voting. For example, it's very difficult to make a system where everybody could actually know that this particular algorithm was used to calculate the votes. So, yes, very good points.
I'd like to continue on the judge and an AI comparison, because in a way a human judge is a closed source system where you cannot know why they made the decisions that they make, but they are still controlled by various mechanisms, and using those same mechanisms to computer programs would probably make some sense. Not now, but in a far further in the future, because the more complicated we are making our AI systems, the harder it has been to actually understand why they are doing what they are doing, even if you do have the source. So in a way, we are already beginning to be at the point that certain AI systems are even by their original makers only understood in a statistical sense, and in a way that they test what they will do in these certain circumstances, and that's the only understanding we have of those systems anymore. But it's a more complicated case. The judge, it will be a long time before we actually get a real computerized judge, which could be compared to the same standard as a human judge. But for simpler cases, it's already, you can just take the computer and a human and compare them directly with some statistical methods, and that's what we are doing.
Yes, and there's please do.
So it might not be a full judge like a public defender, but for example, insurance companies, loans, all of these things, you're already being judged by AI to a large extent. And as is in autonomous vehicles, when there's something that's supposed to be controlling it, as you said, you should be aware, but you're not. You relax, you watch Netflix. The same stuff is happening in loan insurance companies all across the world. I've seen it firsthand when we went in to audit their systems, and like it's really, really difficult to
and that's as well
separate that.
And that's as well. There's a question of what level of understanding should those people have that use these kind of aids, like these predictive models. How thoroughly they should understand what the system actually does, so that they don't just kind of blindly use the results that they were given. Actually, that complexity problem is an interesting one, because there's, and I actually mentioned something about that in the case of autonomous vehicles, because it's possible that if you have a kind of complex enough system, you don't know in beforehand what kind of errors it will make. So, for example, there are these cases where you have a kind of a deep learning system that recognizes images, and then you can kind of fool the system by changing one pixel in the image. So there are always these kind of discontinuities that you may have. It's difficult to know whether you actually have these or not. So that's something that I think maybe the technology is not kind of ripe enough at this stage to do that. So that's kind of an interesting point as well. Who's next? Please.
You did mention about artificial intelligence in warfare. Why?
Oh, that's a good one. I just had kind of a time for some cases, so that's a good area as well. And I would take two that I didn't mention. So one is this kind of AI in warfare. We have this Geneva agreement that autonomous weapons cannot be used, but of course in some cases we just don't care about the Geneva agreement. So everybody does that. So of course that's an issue. Of course, it would be better if wars were fought by robots and not humans. But of course, you can always, in the end, use the autonomous kind of weapons to destroy humans to get a kind of upper hand. So that, yeah, I think that's a problem. And there was actually a kind of a large group of AI researchers that said that all the states should, all the countries should kind of pass a pact that nobody should use kind of or develop autonomous weapons. But I don't know if they have responded yet. So this is one. Another thing that I didn't mention, which is, I think is a kind of important part, is this kind of these late happenings with the elections. For example, the Brexit election and the US 2016 presidential elections, where we know that that there was a lot of kind of social media marketing to kind of restrain some voters from voting and activate others. So this is a kind of a complex issue as well, and there are, I think, both kind of benefits and threats in that area. The benefits are that it's much easier to find a group of people that are interested in certain agenda or maybe a hobby or anything like that. So that's of course a positive thing. So you can kind of make change much easier nowadays. But of course the threat is that somebody may use it kind of in a malevolent way.
There is an interesting summit in 26th of May in London. It's called Global Big Data Defense Summit. You can Google it. There is a quite interesting program involving artificial intelligence in warfare.
Yeah, and I think I'm probably not mistaken if I say that most of the artificial intelligence research up to this day have been financed by DARPA. So it of course has had a big impact in the field, and of course, but I think that it's just a matter of I think that the more discussion we need, the more kind of powerful the technologies become. So.
Does anyone else have a question?
Yeah. Please do.
This is about the equality and discrimination, because if you think of the example of the judge, and you have this, the system, for example, has a much higher percentage for black people getting rough treatment or whatever, then obviously there's something wrong there. And one of the common ways of trying to fix this is to just mandate that it has to be equal among certain groups of people.
Yeah.
And this is used even outside AI. You have, for example, in hiring, you have affirmative action and stuff like that. So it's there is some precedent from before that. But if you try to use this everywhere, then it doesn't quite work, because, for example, if you take healthcare, then different kinds of people have different prognosis for different kinds of treatments. And so if you, for example, mandate that it has to be equal for everybody, then some really ridiculous things will happen, so that you try to fix these into something that is just not... you could, for example, make it better for everybody, but then it turns out to be not equal. Or you could try look at how the things work without AI. What's the prognosis for human treatments, like human doctor-made treatments? But then that might not be the same level as it would be natural for a good AI doing these things, because it might be better at some things and not other things. So how would you try to... But there's healthcare also has to kind of be equal. We would be really annoyed if, for example, black people got a really sucky healthcare and white people got better. So you're supposed to be like equal. But how do you even mandate it to be so? Is there?
Yeah, that's a very complex question, and as well, I think we need to think about what we mean by equality. I think that as long as the artificial intelligence systems they don't like autonomously make decisions concerning humans, if you still have the kind of human factor, we can think about it and kind of rule differently. But if we have these kind of autonomous systems, then we have to have like exact criteria, because that's how they work. They kind of exactly try to optimize certain criteria, and if the criteria are kind of not good, they are somehow biased, then we'll get kind of biased results as well. There's as well one point that I wanted to mention about the kind of making decisions concerning humans. We have some cases where, for example, in Finland, we have this system that when we make the kind of tax report, so we report all our kind of income and what property we have and how much we have made. Then I think the tax officials, they use a system to try to predict whether there's something that they should correct in what you reported. But if they do nothing, then it's kind of accepted as reported. Then it's easier to use kind of artificial intelligence system kind of ethically in kind of ordering the reports in such a way that probably the first ones that they look, they have something to that needs to be kind of rephrased. Because then you're actually not making any decisions concerning humans, you are just kind of optimizing the process. But it's completely another way around if you always have to make a decision and then you kind of make, for example, in insurances, if you make active decisions of not kind of giving reimbursement for some cases, then you need to think more carefully, I think. Yep.
So this is more of a comment to a previous discussion. Can you hear me? Yeah? So lately, because I'm a futurist, but I've been really, really interested in behavioral and cognitive sciences because of the development of artificial intelligence. And I've been actually very surprised how little we can educate ourselves in thinking, how we think and how we make decisions and how biased we actually all are. So I'm actually hoping that there will be a counter trend for us humans to get more education, to get better in thinking, in critical thinking, because that's really, I think, needed. And then another thing that I was thinking about this superintelligence thing and how you phrased it. It was interesting. But I was still wondering about this artificial general intelligence that big companies, like super big companies, are investing it. So
there are kind of researchers that want to work on it because, of course, there's a huge potential. There's, I think, just yesterday or something like that, there was kind of a announcement from OpenAI where they defined some principles on which they based their work on developing artificial general intelligence, which they define being something that can be more productive in most of the professions than human beings. That is like economically kind of beneficial or something like that. Yeah. So yes, there's kind of active research on that topic, but I think currently the results have not been as
as big as what you might think if you read the newspapers. So I don't want to say that it's not a kind of important or interesting research trend, and I've been part of that myself as well from kind of mid 90s as well. So, but I'm just saying that we shouldn't put too much emphasis on that discussion right now. So.
But still a lot of money.
Yeah, yes. And of course they hope that all the time we get some applications on the way. So, yeah.
I guess the continuation for it was really nice bridge, because I had this question about, which includes the bias thing, is like if we come to from the kind of superintelligence and really down to like what we are doing now as professionals who actually design these systems and create them together, what do you see like the best as like at the moment the best kind of practices or best maybe ways to handle bias, to handle explainability, to handle privacy, and what has like this kind of like diversity in terms of who are actually designing this system mean?
Yeah, that's a very kind of multi-sided question, and kind of not an easy one to kind of
in
discuss.
practice. Who should be there doing that?
I think that this is something that the kind of technologists and if it's a company, the business people, they need to work together on this, because I think that to understand these things you need a certain level of kind of technical competence as well, but also you need to kind of the other side. So I think working together is kind of the best option. And I think it would be good to kind of bring all the people like around the same table to discuss these things. So I know that there are these are things that are being discussed in companies right now. So, but I don't. Sometimes they. It's a bit of this, because in the previous talk we had that no silos thing. So I think this is a bit about that we need to kind of do it together. So
yeah, I also kind of have that in mind, that my personal interpretation is that in exactly here what we are doing with data science, what we are doing with machine learning, we should be able to really go beyond talk with no silos and really kind of find a common ground between like different views to be able to solve these issues.
Is there time for one more question?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, but continuing, because you're an expert in AI, so is there, how do you say, an ethical something? Framework. Yeah, or like people that are developing the ethical principles right now, like where is this going at this moment?
I think that's a good question, because I've read some pieces from people that think about these things like as their profession, about future and about AI and about its impact on society, and I haven't seen that much discussion about, for example, what I presented here, and I've seen more about the kind of what the superintelligence does. So I'm a bit kind of worried about that. So I think, of course, it's sometimes it's easier to get funding if you have this kind of long-ranging futuristic visions that you want to kind of look at. But I think that we have like problems now, and for example, digitalization and globalization we've had for like 20 years, and I think we haven't done the things that we should have done. So it's kind of I think there should be like more discussion. I don't know, maybe it's an opportunity that everybody is so afraid of superintelligence that people want to put a lot of kind of resources in thinking about what are the kind of ethical problems in this field. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe we have to be positive about that.